All right, here we go, guys. We are starting in Unit 10, Lecture number 1. The unit is on the American Civil War. Kind of a quick repeat. We have the pictures of the guns again. Just understand the differences between North and South and who can make the guns, who couldn't make the guns. The fact that the bullets are made out of lead and that they created bacteria through the air as they got there, and that the lead was poisonous and it created all these different forms of infection and disease, and that's what kills more soldiers than actual combat on the battlefield. And it's not that these soldiers died from like getting sick. They got infections from the gunshot wounds that they had or other different wounds from fighting. So in a way, the battles did cause the deaths, but not directly on the battlefield did they die. It was usually a couple days later. Song of the daytime.
What we've got here is failure to communicate. Some men you just can't reach.
All right, if you don't know that, it's still not that obvious yet, but it's one of those B-side rare tracks from a band that just got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, or will probably get inducted. Again, the surgeons, there's their surgery tools. They're used to just hacking off body parts, arms, legs, whatever they could. If you were shot in the chest or in the head, you were just kind of put in a pile and told to kind of wait it out, which usually meant you were going to die in a little while. They would come back and grab your belongings or extra weapons or whatever else you had to give to somebody else. So again, though, if you look at a surgeon's area, their toolkit, lots of bone saws, lots of bloodletting devices like these to get blood in and out of you if they needed to. That's just what they did. It's not like today where you have surgery for hours and hours. It was a couple minutes, kind of saw off the body part that's affected, patch you up, hope you don't get infected, and move you on your way.
So you get what we had here last week, which is the way he wants. Well, he is. I don't like it any more than you do.
All right, if you don't know the song yet, their lead singer has really red hair. That's a clue right there. All right, moving on to the Civil War itself. There are the two battle maps, or the two battle flags. Sorry, there's the American flag at the time. There is the rebel battle flag, not their country's flag, the battle flag of the Confederate States of America, the stars and bars, what they would call it. In our case, the North versus South. If you look at the advantages, the way the North will be set up is that they're going to have blue for everything for them. The South, they always wore something red under their jersey. There's their little logo. For the advantages for the North, they have 22 million people, lots of people to pick from if they need a draft or if they need to pull people into the military. They control 90%, 92% of the manufacturing, which is huge in a war. You're going to manufacture guns, cannons, everything you can, including uniforms, which, like the movie said, really weren't that great, but they were something to have. So manufacturing is a huge plus for the North going into the war. They do have more agriculture, more actual farms that produce food than the South. The South has lots of farms too, but they're more cash crops, whereas the North has the farms for food, but yet, like the movie said, neither side was eating well. Most sides were starving to death anyway once the war broke out. Railroad-wise, transportation, the North holds almost 3/4 of the railroads, which is a huge plus for transporting people, transporting goods quicker than anywhere else. And the North has the Army and Navy combined, which will be 2.9 million men throughout the Civil War. So they do have a Navy. The North controls that. The South does not have a Navy, which hurts them. The North will actually try to blockade the South or put, boats around the coast to kind of choke out the South from the rest of the world so they cannot get new supplies in or out of the Southern Confederate States. For the South, they have better officers. The leaders, the best leaders or the best coaches for like a sport come from the South. Their sons went to West Point to learn how to be better soldiers, whereas the Northern kids, the rich kids, went to learn how to take over the factories. The Southern kids were raised outdoors. They knew how to hunt. They knew how to fire guns. Northern kids, they never learned how to fire a gun. They didn't have to. In the South, they're going to fight a defensive war. They're going to stay in the South, let the North come to them. They know where the area, they know shortcuts through places, they know where the high ground is or the hills to take. They also thought the French and the British would help them. They have something very important to the rest of the world. They have cotton, and the cotton can be traded around the world because they're not giving their cotton plants to the North. They can now open up and trade with anyone they want, and they are motivated to fight because they are fighting for their independence. All right, moving on. Again, another example for the band. The band's lead guitarist is a man named Slash, and he has incredibly awesome hair and usually a top hat on top of that. Moving on to the goals. For the North wanted to pressure the Union or keep the United States together. They wanted to push the idea of slavery or end slavery moving west. Right now, slavery is not something they want to get rid of all the way. It's just the North, with Abraham Lincoln in charge, the North wants slavery to stop moving west. And then number 3, they want democracy. They want to prove to the world that America will get over this, that we will get by or get through this as a nation, and that everybody still in America has the power to vote and change things. They're going to do this by, A, blockading the coast. I already went over how they're going to do that. They're going to blockade not just around the Gulf of Mexico, but also the Atlantic Ocean. They're going to control the Mississippi River as well. Their idea is if they control the Mississippi River and they blockade around the coast, they will, in essence, choke out the South or the southern states from the rest of the world, meaning that eventually the South will run out of supplies. They want to seize the capital of the South, which is Richmond, Virginia, and they want to continue to control the railroads, which gives them access to all the transportation they need besides the river and the oceans. Their leaders are Abe Lincoln, the commander-in-chief, General George McClellan, a guy named Ulysses S. Grant we'll talk about, and William Tecumseh Sherman. But the important thing here is that the North will go through lots of different generals or leaders during the war, kind of like the Indians, Browns, and Cavs. We're going to go through lots of coaches because we're pretty awful, and we blame the coach when things aren't going our way. Number 2, for the South. The South is pushing states' rights. The war itself for them is because they believe Abe Lincoln is taking away their rights as a state to pick whether or not to have slavery. Number 2, their issue is slavery. Slavery itself. They want slavery to move west. They want to keep slavery. That's another huge issue that goes right with states' rights to keep going. They also want liberty. They want their freedom. They want to be separate than the United States, to be on their own, to have their cotton, trade it with everybody else, and become a prosperous country on their own. They're going to do this or win the war by fighting defensively, staying in the South. They want to seize Washington, D.C., by controlling Maryland. The beginning of the war is going to take place in Maryland to try to control Maryland. Maryland's a slave state, but it decides to fight for the North. It's a border state. And they're going to try to capture and control Maryland to surround the area of D.C. They want to prolong the war like a Rocky movie, take it as long as possible, let this war take a long time and cost a lot of money so that Abe Lincoln stops fighting because it's just costing the country too much money, too many people. The longer the war goes on, the more it benefits the South. And they want to get European support, again, using cotton as a trade item, trying to get the British or the French to help them out, much like the French helped us out in the American Revolution. Their leader is pictured right there. His name is Jefferson Davis. He is the president of the South. You have a general named Robert E. Lee. You have a guy named Stonewall Thomas Jackson. You have Pierre Beauregard and General George Pickett. Their leaders stay the same. They have the best leaders of the two different sides. Their generals are very good and very well trained from West Point. All right, getting into some of the battles now. Here we go. The way the battles are set up, if you look at the top, I give you the name. Sometimes the Civil War battles have two different names. So in this case, it's called the Battle of Bull Run. Now, Bull Run is a creek that runs through the area of Manassas, Virginia. And Manassas, Virginia is right there. Now, the North and South called their war or battles two different names. The North would name their battle after the nearest body of water. So in this case, the South calls the battles after the nearest body of water. The South called this battle, and the newspapers in the South would call it the First Battle of Bull Run. The North names the battle after the city that it's fought in. So in the newspapers in the South, it would be called Bull Run. In the newspapers in the North, it would be called the Battle of Manassas, Virginia. So the first battle takes place in Manassas, Virginia on July 21st, 1861. The little flag represents the winner of the battle. In this case, it is the South. You get usually the leaders at the top, which in this case is Irvin McDowell, who is fired right after the event or right after the battle. He's in charge of something called, he's in charge of he's commanding officer of the American Army. There's also an American Army called the Army of the Potomac, which is stationed in Washington, D.C. That is under the command of General George McClellan. For the South, you have Pierre Beauregard, who's in charge, and you have a general called Stonewall Jackson, who gets his nickname during this battle. The battle itself is fought 25 miles south of Washington, D.C. That's a one-day march to get to the capital of the United States. Spectators for both sides show up to think that this is like a sporting event. Both sides kind of agree that they believe the South and North will show up to this battlefield. The North will start firing. The South will surrender. The war will be over. It was a quick little confrontation. Everybody will be happy and we'll move on as a country. So people show up thinking this is going to be just a great little grand event to watch, something that you could bring your kids to. Unfortunately, that the Southern soldiers believe they're fighting for something and their independence. They want to win. They're more motivated. The North is scared. They're not really ready for this. Most of their soldiers are not really well trained yet. They're getting trained, but they're still just not ready for that first big battle. And when the gunshots start, the South doesn't run away. They're fighting. The spectators really get to see the horrors of war with blood and body parts going kind of everywhere. The South ends up winning, which stuns the North. And easily the South could have marched right into Washington, D.C. The Southern soldiers assumed, though, that they couldn't get to Washington, that there were more soldiers waiting for them, which there were not. But this is one of those examples where without the use of technology like we have today, or with the limited technology they have, they didn't push farther in to end the war. So the South wins. It stuns the world. Not just America. It stuns the whole world that the Southern Confederate States have beaten the North. And if you look at the casualty numbers, and by the way, I will never ask you these numbers on a test. They're just to give you an idea in your head how big these battles were. The North and South combined for about 800 people dead, almost 900. The wounded numbers are almost 2,700. And if you look at missing, for the South, 13 people missing. That probably means that they couldn't find the remains of them or that a cannon might have blown them off and you didn't know. Whereas in the North, 1,300 soldiers are missing. Take a second to guess why that might be. Well, if you guessed that they were scared and most of them set their guns down and ran home, you are absolutely, totally correct. When the gunshots started, most of the kids in the North who are fighting, 18, 19 years old or younger, they're not ready for this war. They set their guns down and they run home, which is in a way illegal and running away from the battle, but they just were not ready for this at all whatsoever. So that is the first battle of the Civil War. All right, moving on. If you don't know, the artist is Guns N' Roses, and the song is aptly titled today, Civil War. The Battle of Shiloh is our last little slide for the day. It is a battle fought in Tennessee for control of the Mississippi River. Shiloh is the city and also the creek that's kind of there, so it's named after both, and it's over on April 6th and 7th of 1862. As you see, the United States wins this battle. The Northern general is Ulysses S. Grant, a man from Ohio. The Southern general is, again, Pierre Beauregard, and Albert Sidney Johnston shows up. The surprise tactic here is that the South is winning the battle. They've pushed the North almost to a river, and the North is waiting for reinforcements to show up from Ohio. And while they're there, in the painting that I've provided you, this is an area where a group from Indiana, a infantry group from Indiana, actually holds up their own little fort, makeshift fort, on this road, and they've kind of surrounded the road so that they're holding it like a defensive area. The South keeps trying to come into this area of the woods and the road to capture it, and every time they go in, they keep getting shot out or pushed out. And the general, Albert Sidney Johnston, the commanding officer for the South, is so angry he calls it a hornet's nest, meaning that every time he goes in, it's like kicking a hornet's nest. He gets stung out. He gets so mad at his men for not taking it that he rides in with his men to give them motivation. And as he rides out of being pushed out of the hornet's nest, the men notice that he's kind of pale. And when they take him off his horse, they notice that he's been shot behind the back of the leg. He actually got a bullet wound through the back of the kneecap. So the bullet went in through the back of his knee and out through the front, causing a major artery to be blown open. And he ends up bleeding to death right there on the battlefield, which motivates the North. And when the reinforcements show up, it pushes the North onto victory. If you look at the casualty numbers, in a couple days, only 2 days of fighting, 24,000 people total are killed, wounded, or missing. And that's huge numbers. That's roughly half the size or population of Mentor, Ohio, killed, wounded, or missing in just a day and a half, almost 2 days of fighting. So there you go for the notes so far. We're up to the Battle of Shiloh. We'll be moving on to more battles. We have about 10 battles left. Really quick, because I forgot to mention this, going back to the battle before, Stonewall Jackson gets his nickname by standing like a stone wall. He actually